Hi everybody, welcome. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. We have a number of people who are signing in, so sit back, hang tight, and we'll get started in just a few moments. Thank you. Go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Catherine Jacques, and I am here today on behalf of the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders, or GTL Center at American Institute for Research. And today we are so excited to be sharing some of our teacher leadership work. We are going to be sharing our new Teacher Leadership Toolkit 2.0, which we co-developed with leading educators. And we're also here to hear about what that looks like in practice, some real stories from people in the field who have worked around designing and implementing teacher leadership. We're really here to talk about how teacher leadership can be designed to help states and districts explore what that looks like and drive decision-making around teacher leadership structures and opportunities. So we're going to spend the first bit of today talking about the new toolkit. But we're going to spend most of our time today hearing about what that kind of decision-making looks like in the real world, and we're going to hear from our amazing guest presenters today. So besides myself, we're going to hear from a number of people. We have on our presentation today Maggie Sly from Leading Educator, Teresa Mooney, who's going to share a little bit of the work we've been doing with CCSSO around teacher leadership. We'll also be hearing from Ali Friedlander, who's from Texas Education Agency and is also a former State Teacher of the Year. And we'll hear from Megan Archuleta, who has been a teacher leader herself and now a school leader, a leader of leaders in Herfano School District in Colorado. So today we really want to focus on teacher leadership as a game changer for schools. We know that teacher leadership, when it's well designed, can expose more students to great teachers, which can help them reach new levels of achievement. It can also help create a more stable teacher workforce, incentivizing people to stay in the field for longer, helping other teachers improve their craft. And we know that teacher leaders are invaluable in being able to provide some of those on-the-ground insights into different barriers to success that might exist, especially for the most at-need, at-risk students in each school. We also want to keep in mind that teacher leadership, when it is successful, when it helps get to these aims, needs to be contextual and systemic, so not just an add-on opportunity. And well-designed teacher leadership is really thoughtfully and carefully considered for that local context. It can really help to spark those system-wide changes and doesn't just exist by itself alone. So our mission at the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders is, of course, to help to foster vibrant networks that help to achieve success. And we know that states especially have great power to be a convener, to help support innovation in schools and districts, and to help bring about and create access to different resources to help support this work. Since we worked with leading educators so closely on the toolkit we're going to be talking about today, I want to turn things over to Maggie for a moment to also share the leading educators mission and how they support this work. Maggie?
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everyone. Maggie Sly from Leading Educators. Yep, we believe that all students deserve great schools, and we help school systems accelerate their academic and instructional improvement efforts because we believe that opportunity is created for all students when students have access to exceptional teaching. And we know that teachers also deserve the opportunity to be exceptional. And so much of that is aligned to leveraging teacher leadership and strong models of professional learning. And we're really, really delighted to be here and be part of this today. Thank you.
So here's our agenda for today. As I mentioned, we're going to start with the toolkit, and then we are going to spend most of today hearing from folks who have actually done this work, who can tell a little bit more about their experiences. We are going to have time for questions at the end, but we would also love to answer questions throughout. So if you have a question, please insert it in the chat box, and we will get to it as soon as we can. That way you can hear the answer to your question right alongside the content that may have brought it up for you. If you have an overarching question, we can, of course, leave that to the end and talk about it more then. So we're going to jump right into things. Let's start with the toolkit. Now, I fibbed a little bit. We are going to talk about the toolkit, but I also want to turn things over to my colleague, Teresa, who can talk a little bit about the needs of the field that we've seen. What are the needs that states and districts have around teacher leadership, and how can this toolkit help them make some of those key decisions? Turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. As Catherine mentioned, my name is Teresa Mooney. I'm a Senior Program Associate at CCSSO, or the Council of Chief State School Officers. For those of you who are not familiar with that organization, we are a nonpartisan membership organization located in Washington, D.C., and we represent state chiefs of education from across the country. So I'm very grateful to be able to share some of our work with you on this webinar today. A little background on this piece of work that I'm talking about. The TLLC, or the Teaching, Leading, and Learning Collaborative, is one of our state collaboratives that brings states together to talk about how they can really build stronger connections across their teacher and leader initiatives and also their instructional work at the state level. Our belief there is that when you actually knit those two streams of work together, it'll better enhance teacher talent management systems and also allow for more targeted professional development and therefore impact more students. As a part of our TLLC, we have a smaller work group of about 13 states that are really working toward learning more about teacher leadership and what that can look like within their states. So this teacher leadership work group, again, is 13 states, and it's part of this collaborative that really aims to look at how states can leverage teacher leadership and move this work forward to really promote more effective, high-quality, standards-based instruction that meets the needs of every single student. So I just wanted to call out a few state priorities and big themes that we've seen in this year with this work group. So on a broad level, all of our states are thinking about ways to better scale and sustain teacher leadership work across their states, and also how they can think about communicating this work to stakeholders. I also want to make sure to note that all of this is very much grounded in equity for states. And what we mean by that is that we see that teacher leadership is work that can really help make sure that every student has access to highly effective teachers, and that every student is able to have their needs met by teachers in their classroom. Before I move on to some specifics about these priorities and what we're working on in the work group, I also just wanted to call out that I have the honor of co-leading this work group with Catherine Jacques with the Center of Great Teachers and Leaders. And so, Catherine, please feel free to jump in if I miss anything here. So I wanted to talk about what some of these main state priorities are. And there are just a handful that I want to call out as main themes that states are moving toward and what CCSSO is working to really support. So the first big theme is states thinking about how they can better support district level teacher leadership initiatives. And so for our states, they're often really thinking about what is that balance between local control and also having that intensive state support. We also are seeing states exploring different models for teacher leadership. We recognize that state context and capacity is very different depending on where you are. And so it's important in this work group to really be thinking about how states can approach these different models flexibly and best adapt them to their specific contexts. A third theme that we're seeing across states is really thinking about how states can use teacher leadership programs to promote both short and long-term impacts on students. And so when we are talking about teacher leadership with our states, we're really thinking about teachers as instructional leaders who can really move to enhance the capacity to deliver impact on students. We also are seeing states thinking about what that teacher leader professional development and professional learning may look like. And again, determining what this looks like at the state level. Is this the state giving some of that professional learning opportunities? Is it developed more locally, or can this be done through some partnerships as well? And lastly, we're seeing states moving toward thinking about how do we actually evaluate whether our teacher leadership models are working across our state, and what really is that impact, and how do we continuously improve upon what we have been doing. Just to get a little bit granular about what our actions are in this work group to get us at examining these priorities, we meet with this work group 3 times a year in fall, winter, and spring. And during this work group time, states develop action plans to really isolate what is it that they're working on this year so that we can best support them through webinars and also through connecting them with experts and also other states who may be working on similar content. We also have been, as I mentioned, giving some webinars in between these meetings in order to really give that technical assistance to states and make sure that they are exposed to a wide variety of information from experts across the field. Our next meeting will be in Baltimore at the end of this month. We're going to be supporting states with the priorities that I mentioned above. We'll be talking specifically at this meeting about the state role in developing and selecting teacher leaders and also measuring that impact. We'll also be spotlighting some state successes and building in time for state-to-state critical friend conversations, because we know that there really is so much expertise across states that we want to make sure that they are spending time connecting with each other. So with that, I'll pass it back to Catherine, but if you do have any questions about this work, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is listed on this slide. You also can reach out to Catherine, who is very well informed on this work as well, who can share with you a little bit more about the work or connect you over to CCSSO. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, it's a really exciting work group, and I think we've learned a lot from it about what it takes to do this work and what questions people have. So we hope that our resources and everything we'll hear today will be really helpful to those that are grappling with how do we do this work. So I am going to pass the mic again really quickly back over to Maggie, because this is not the first version of the toolkit, thus Teacher Leadership Toolkit 2.0. You may have seen the original toolkit that Leading Educators put out back in 2016, and I wanted to give Maggie an opportunity to talk briefly about what that work was and where we started this from. So Maggie, take it away.
Thanks so much, Catherine. So how it began is that we were invited by the Joyce and Gates Foundations to really start to puzzle through how states could better support teacher leadership, and particularly teacher leadership that resulted in systemic improvement and student achievement. And so we were selected because we had a lot of experience working with districts and less experience working at the state level. And so in order to ensure that we were building something that would truly, truly be useful, we built a model where we worked very, very closely with 3 states that already had evidence of expertise in teacher leadership, really worked side by side with them to learn from them, to synthesize some of their best practices, and then to take that synthesis and test it out with 10 different states. And so over this process of, convening experts and then testing out some of their strategies in different contexts, we were able to then refine the toolkit, get it to a place where we really thought that it was at the level of principles that could transfer across multiple states, and yet still have some of those call outs to the specific context and problems of practice that individual states experienced, and thought that that balance could be helpful, and we're very excited about it. And then we're really excited to support AIR in the relaunch of 2.0. So I'll hand it back over to you, Catherine.
Great, thanks Maggie. Okay, so let's actually talk about new toolkits now that we've gotten all of our framing and intro. So this 2.0 version of the toolkit is really designed to help build knowledge about teacher leadership itself, to get different stakeholders, whether they be educators, teacher leaders themselves, other leaders in systems, to provide input on what they think teacher leadership should look like in their own context, how it can help solve some of those issues or improve their own outcomes. And really, we want this toolkit to help drive decision making. There's so many different ways to do teacher leadership. It can seem sometimes like, where do you go? How do you know where to start? This tool is a great way to help start making some of those decisions and narrow down exactly where you might want to go. As Teresa shared, we want to think about context-specific approaches, customized approaches that can lead to measurable improvements, especially improvements for students over time. So that's really what we hope this toolkit will help people do. And we also just want to note that this toolkit was a truly collaborative effort. We worked with experts in all kinds of topic areas. So looking at this toolkit through an equity lens, making sure that it can help promote equity. Thinking about how this toolkit can promote the types of teacher leadership that can help students with disabilities and English learners. Thinking about how this toolkit can help to create teacher leadership that can help schools identify the need of improvement. All of this comes to the point of teacher leadership not being an end of itself, but teacher leadership being a strategy that can help improve the teaching and learning of systems overall. So here's the link to the toolkit online. We'll also include this in an email blast, but if you're wanting to look at the toolkit and see what does this actually look like, it is live on the GTL Center site. It's also pretty easily searchable if you do a Google search, so I encourage you to check it out. We're not going to talk about the entire toolkit today because it is a huge resource. But instead, I'd like to talk about just some different components of it and how you might use those in practice. So like the original toolkit that Maggie talked about, this toolkit also has 3 components that can help with the entire circle of planning. So thinking about what goals you want to set around teacher leadership, how you would achieve those goals, what strategies you want to select. That's really what the teacher leadership is going to look like. And then thinking about how to monitor that. What are course corrections you might need to make as you learn more? What are success stories that come out of that work? I also want to note one new thing about the toolkit that is different than the original version is that we have 10 linked resources. You can use the toolkit on its own, but we try to keep that pretty streamlined so it's not an overwhelming amount of information. If you want to get into lots more information, considerations, things that you can think about in terms of the directions you want to go, there is a huge wealth of information in these 10 linked resources. There are hyperlinks throughout the toolkit, so you can look at them as wanted. You could also pull out any of these resources and use them with a stakeholder group or sit down with colleagues. Do a reading session and talk about what has bubbled up, what resonates with you. So we really encourage you to check out not just the toolkit itself, but also these linked resources throughout. So one of the main ways that you can use this toolkit is thinking about what types of teacher leadership strategies you would like to use, or what kinds of teacher leadership you would like to foster in the field. So one of the big components of the toolkit is the strategy selection section. You can look, there are 9 different approaches that we have organized to fostering teacher leadership. So you can look at these and think about which one of these resonate with our political context, the issues and needs that we've identified, and the different kinds of resources that we want to capitalize on. Throughout the toolkit, there are also lots of guiding questions. You can use these as a working document, a template, if you want to put in notes, or you can just use these to help further that decision-making process, thinking about what strategies are right for your context, your schools, your districts, your state. So for instance, in terms of going back to those linked resources, we not only have lots and lots of considerations, guiding questions on all of those different approaches, Resource 3 also gives a lot more information about each of those different approaches. So if there's one that you're particularly interested in, we would highly recommend that you check out the section on that approach within this resource. It provides more information, including guiding questions, state examples that you can look at, different descriptions of different ways to do this. It's a way to take this resource and go deeper and further drive your decision making. Another one of those linked resources that I think is really helpful is the Teacher Leader Role Profiles, Resource 2. So this provides descriptions of lots of different types of teacher leader roles, and it also includes competencies, so what are the key skills that teacher leaders need to be successful in these types of roles, and examples of what these roles look like in practice. This is an amazing resource that you could use with a teacher leader advisory committee or another group of educators as you're trying to design teacher leader roles. You might look at a pool of teacher leaders you have yourself, like perhaps you have a lot of national board certified teachers that don't have a formal role, that aren't really doing anything, but you know are accomplished. You could bring them together and have them look at this resource together and say, what kind of roles would we like to take on? What kind of roles map to our skill set? This is a great resource for engaging educators, teacher leaders, other stakeholders, and getting their input in what they would like teacher leadership to look like. The last part of the toolkit I will share before I turn it over to colleagues to share their stories is part 3 on monitoring progress and impact. You may or may not be familiar with our company's tagline, which is making research relevant. We often think that all of these metrics, milestones, success stories that come out of teacher leadership, those are really critically important. Not only because they can help course correct, but because they can help build buy-in, they can help people replicate things that work, tweak things that don't. It can be really crucial to the success of the teacher leadership work they're doing. So part 3 of the toolkit is really helpful in that it lays out a lot of guidance on how to set milestones and how to identify metrics to monitor progress towards those milestones. You can also check out Resource 9, which is all about collecting data. We know that if you're launching a really big, large-scale teacher leadership initiative with hundreds of people who are in new roles, then you may want to invest in a big external evaluation to better understand that. But if you're thinking about starting with a smaller step, it may be helpful to take a look at these resources and think about how can we gather stories on our own? How can we set ourselves up about the feedback loop that will help us improve over time? Okay, so with that, I am going to switch things over and stop talking myself as much and introduce our first presenter. I would like to welcome and thank Allison Friedlander, or Allie, for joining us to tell us a little bit about the work that they're doing in Texas at the state level to spark and foster So, Allie, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. And can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm super excited about spending this time with you to talk about a topic that I am very passionate about, which is teacher leadership. I was asked to share a little bit about my background and my own leadership journey. So Catherine, if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So I just started at TEA this summer. I came from a campus in Austin ISD. Had been teaching for 10 years. And when I think back to the beginning of my years teaching, I entered the profession through Teach for America, and I think they really shaped my perspective and perception of teaching. Literally, the framework that they use to define excellent teaching is called teaching as leadership. So I learned early on that teaching is an act of leadership. We do things as teachers that folks that are leaders in all different sectors do. We set big goals, we influence others, we plan, we execute on plans, we reflect on our practice, we work relentlessly to ensure that we're achieving the best outcomes we can for kids. So then when I started to transition into teacher leadership roles, I kind of took that framework with me and started thinking about ways in which I could act as a leader with my colleagues. And I fortunately benefited from a number of teacher leaders on the campuses where I worked, and was very fortunate to always work on campuses where there really was a lot of collaboration and teachers learning from one another. We didn't, in the first two campuses I worked on, have formal, lots of formal leadership roles per se, but I remember like so many teachers helping me along the way and visiting classrooms and seeing different approaches to their work, which was really helpful. I think in about my 5th year teaching, Austin ISD wanted to pilot a new role, and I took on a role. I had been a team lead for a while as a classroom teacher, and took on a lead role on my campus where I supported PLC leaders across the campus. And this was really a great opportunity to transition into more of a campus-wide leadership role where I was working with leaders across the school. So while we were looking at student goals and reflecting on our practices as teachers and setting goals associated to those, I think that this group kind of took it to the next level, and we started reflecting on our own work as teacher leaders on the campus and setting goals around what we wanted to accomplish through our PLCs, what sort of leadership skills were most impactful, identifying areas for growth, and then sharing practices across the campus. So that's an example of an instructional-based kind of teacher leader role that I had. I then went to grad school, and one of the professors that I had there really spoke a lot about how, I went to grad school thinking that I might transition into a coaching position at some point. And really, this professor talked about this concept of reforming schools from the inside out, and how teachers and principals can really build models of excellence in their schools that are replicable across the system. And this professor also talked a lot about the importance of national board as a way to help professionalize teaching, which really resonated with me. I was really eager when I decided to go back to the classroom. I decided coaching was not the route for me, and pursued national board certification. And through that process, I learned about all of the work that teachers can do outside of beyond the 4 walls of their classroom, and beyond the walls of their own school. And something that really resonated with me about national board is this idea of teachers shaping the profession that they're working in, and how teachers can and should act as advocates and be at the decision-making table, be it at the campus, state, or national level. So I had the great pleasure of joining a number of different groups and organizations. I joined our campus advisory council and a district advisory council to help inform district and school leadership on a number of different initiatives. I had the opportunity to join Teach Plus's advisory board, teacher advisory board here in Texas, when they were looking to launch their fellowship, and had the opportunity to testify on a bill at the Capitol, and led some focus groups and met with some decision makers at TEA. Also had the benefit of joining Hope Street Group's National Teacher Fellowship a couple years ago, and through that had the opportunity to meet with folks at the U.S. Department of Education and some other places. So that's a little bit about my leadership journey. And then last year, a position opened up at our state agency to work on teacher leadership. So I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to work to expand opportunities for teachers to lead beyond our classrooms at the state level. And that's how I ended up at TEA this summer. So Catherine, if we can go to the next slide, that would be great. So here we see a couple of TEA's strategic priorities, and the first is to recruit, support, and retain teachers and principals. We know that teachers are the largest in-school factor affecting student achievement. So we're doing a lot of work around trying to raise the prestige of teaching and recruit the best into the profession, support teachers and retain teachers, and that's where this teacher leadership work really connects to these strategic priorities. I think one piece that we're also looking at is how we can help raise the prestige of teaching and recruit the very best and brightest into this profession. And we're thinking about ways to shape career paths and see teacher leadership as a piece of that work. So on the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about this teacher leadership grant that we designed. I worked with Catherine a little bit on this. So we put out a teacher leadership grant in early November. We got some federal funds that needed to be used on comprehensive campuses in Texas. That's the lowest 5% of Title I schools in terms of closing achievement gaps. So we had this pot of money that we could use for teacher leadership. And so we set the goals of using teacher leadership to close achievement gaps and then also improve, obviously, teacher effectiveness and retention. So the way that we designed this grant is we decided to give the opportunity to districts to partner with organizations that focus on instructional-based teacher leadership to really build the capacity of teacher leaders and improve student outcomes on those campuses. So some partners that we had on our list were Leading Educators, New Leaders, the TAP program from NIET, and the New Teacher Center. And I had collaborated a little bit with Catherine and got a sneak peek of this toolkit, which really helped inform the design of this grant specifically. There you can see on the right side a couple of the key components of the grant. So the toolkit really helped build out some of the vision that we had for this grant and taking into consideration how important a rigorous recruitment and selection process is to ensure that we're doing our due diligence when we select teacher leaders to make sure that there are high standards in place and we're finding folks that are really well suited to do this important work. And Toolkit also talks about the need for professional development and ongoing support. So we really wanted to ensure that teachers were well positioned to continue growing in their development and in the leadership skills that they would need to work effectively with colleagues across their campuses. And we thought that this would be a great opportunity to have districts partner with organizations that really specialize in this work that could really provide some additional capacity for districts. Another piece that I just wanted, there are a bunch of things here to highlight, are this idea of the clear and formal teacher leadership roles. I think Catherine, a couple of slides ago, had shared a graphic showing all these different types of teacher leadership, and I think it's a term that sometimes there's not always a ton of clarity around, or I could say teacher leadership and mean one thing, and someone could say teacher leadership and mean something completely different. So through this grant process, we asked districts to really think about how they're going to define these teacher leader roles and kind of clearly spell out the expectations for teacher leadership, and then also match the professional development and support of district administration and campus leadership to ensure that they're reaching the outcomes that they set. And then, so we designed this grant in early November, and we got some applications in, so we'll be taking a look at those moving forward. On the next slide, I just wanted to share a few thoughts on where we're going from here as an agency. So we are taking a look at developing a long-term vision for teacher leadership. So I'm actually in the process now of meeting with teachers and focus groups to get some input from the field on the needs that teacher leadership could address. And I think this is something that the toolkit will really help us with as well. I think about resource 2, Catherine, that you shared just a few moments ago, that had those teacher leader role profiles. There are so many different ways that we can think about teacher leadership. So here are, on this list, we have a number of needs that we think teacher leadership could help address. So we're looking at data related to student outcomes. We're looking at issues with capacity and the potential for distributed leadership on campuses. We're looking at teacher retention and then disaggregating that retention and looking at the retention at on rural campuses, looking at the retention of teachers of color, for example, and thinking about how teacher leadership could help drive improvements in teacher retention. We're also looking at opportunities to build those career paths to really help build the prestige of teaching and address some of the recruitment challenges we're seeing. We're trying to create opportunities for teachers to help shape the profession, potentially through advocacy and policy work, and also identify opportunities for differentiated pay. So we're right now going out to the field and asking teachers to join focus groups and weigh in on these issues and see, like, do these needs match up with what you're seeing in the field? And then we're also asking them what they think would be most impactful. And I think this is an area that the toolkit will really help us, because we can share some concrete examples. I love all of the links and specific resources and examples of teacher leadership that are included in the toolkit. And it's been really great. I've seen also teachers are like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that these sorts of opportunities were available, or, you know, policy fellowships, we didn't know those existed. And so I see a lot of interest from the field. And we just want to make sure that we're matching those to the needs that we're seeing across the state. So that's just a little bit about the work that we are doing in Texas. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Catherine, if any popped up, or anything that you want me to elaborate on. And I look forward to hearing from the other presenters on the call.
Thank you so much, Allie. It's amazing to listen to you talk about this, because I know we've had some chats about it for a while, and it's so exciting to see it come to fruition.
It is.
You know, I was reflecting as you were talking about your professional growth that, you know, you've had a lot of different roles. This journey to you being at TEA and thinking about how to promote teacher leadership, it's been a long journey, and it reminds me how great it is to have lots of different types of teacher leadership opportunities. So you may not be always ready for exactly one kind of role, but having lots of different kinds of opportunities to step into can be just an amazing way to develop great educators into those who can also think about these broader system changes. So yeah, I thought your story was really inspiring, and thank you so much for sharing it.
Of course. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. So look out for great work happening in Texas around teacher leadership. We had another presenter from Texas, from Dallas, but like many teacher leaders, I heard from her today that she actually has to go run into a meeting. So she asked me if I could share a little bit about their work. So I'm going to briefly share a little bit about the work that is happening in Dallas around teacher leadership. So this is specifically around teacher leadership for school improvement, very similar to the grant that Allie was just telling us about. And this is about hybrid roles that can help promote school improvement. So I will share Sharifa Nadir Mason. She was going to present with us. Very sorry not to have her, but we're going to share her email in a few slides. So if you do have any questions or want to learn more about their work, you can definitely get in touch with her. Sharifa is an amazing educator, another former Teacher of the Year, and she is a Distinguished Master Teacher of Social Studies in Dallas ISD. So Dallas decided a while ago that they wanted to try some new efforts for school turnaround for 7 chronically low-performing schools. And their thinking was that if they could bring some amazing teachers to these schools to help with some systemic type of work, that they might be able to change the climate, the culture, and then, of course, the academic performance of these schools, and change it in a sustainable way. So this became the ACE, or the Accelerating Campus Excellence Program. You can see in this little green graphic that there are a lot of different prongs and components to this work, 2 of which are strategic staffing and instructional excellence. So in this model, there are lots and lots of different kinds of teacher leader roles that include different kinds of stipends and relief funds. So today, I just want to briefly share a little bit about what all of these different roles are across these schools. I think it's a really great example of how a district can use multiple kinds of teacher leader roles to help promote holistic improvement. So this is just the first 3. There are actually 8 different roles that I want to just touch on today. You can see here there's a department chair that helps implement leadership initiatives and translate those to the everyday classroom level. Highly effective teachers that work with the most needy students those students that need the most support, and then provide modeling on what those strategies look like in practice for other teachers. There's also a demonstration teacher where they are in a demonstration classroom that's open for general best practices so that other teachers can come and observe what that looks like. There's also peer observers who provide non-evaluative feedback to help others grow their practice. Coaches who come in and do more intensive support co-teaching and things to help promote the use of innovative strategies and to improve teaching and learning, again, especially for those students who are most in need. There's also a data lead. Data analysis is sometimes something that it takes time and skills and not always in the comfort zone of all teachers. So having the data lead is really helpful. They can disaggregate data, analyze it, and look at what they want to do for next steps. Finally, there are professional development leads and PLC leads. So they also have these that help to promote more changes to general practice, helping to improve overall instructional efficacy for all teachers in the school. Now, you may have heard of a lot of these different kinds of roles. What I think is really compelling is that all of these roles are available. It's not just one. They said, we want to have lots of different types of teacher leadership opportunities. It gives teacher leaders different entries and access points and lets them capitalize on different skills and preferences to help promote those sorts of improvements. I also want to share that, even though you may have heard of these roles before, they have a real impact. They have seen in Dallas, in these schools, big changes in academic improvement. So you can see yellow is previous, and then last data they had was 2016. They've seen really big improvements. They've also seen improvements in student behavior, fewer discipline referrals. So there's a lot of evidence that this approach works for school improvement, and they're just doing really great work in Dallas. So, like I said, I want to say thank you so much to Cherise Budd for sharing this work, even though she couldn't be here today. Here is her email, so if you have any questions, you can definitely get in touch with her or us. And a lot of information is available online about the ACE program, so if you want to learn more, I encourage you to check out all of the resources that are available. So with that, I would like to transition back to Maggie. She's going to tell us a little bit more about what teacher leadership work can look like at the district level, and she's going to share some of the success stories that they've had in DC. Maggie, take it away.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
There you go. Sorry about that. There you go.
So as I shared earlier at Leading Educators, we focus on evidence-based teaching and leadership practices. And we align ourselves to these 4 areas: equity, ELA and math content, learning culture, and learning systems and conditions. Equity is our North Star. We are focused on equity and ensuring that all students have access to the opportunities that they deserve. And we know that in order to ensure or contribute to that happening, that teachers also need to experience equitable supports for their own development, since it makes a direct impact on the opportunities that our students have. And so we focus on not only developing the content knowledge within teachers, teacher leaders, system leaders, but also thinking about how we support systemic improvement that does result in student outcomes by really focusing on building those learning systems and conditions alongside districts so that this learning takes root, it leaves a legacy, and regardless if funding shifts or politics shift or what have you, there is a core experience around professional learning that all schools know now how to replicate, because we've aligned resources in such a way to support that. And similarly with learning culture, we know that for professional learning to take root, and in particular, in order to support the risk-taking that happens in classrooms as a result of professional learning, the adult learning culture has to be something that is intentionally developed and nurtured over time. Our focus on ELA and math content is important to note because it represents a shift in our point of view over the last couple of years. When we led the development of the first toolkit, we were content agnostic. We were focused nearly entirely on just teacher leadership as leadership. And what we saw over the course of a couple of years is that there was just this tremendous need to, again, support teachers in developing deeper content knowledge in the age of the Common Core. Everything shifted, and yet the way that we were supporting teachers, we hadn't seen a similarly sort of seismic shift. And we really wanted to step forward to support with that. And so as I'm talking through this case study with DC Public Schools and LEAP, want to be clear that this is very much focused on how we leverage teacher leadership at scale across a district to support content knowledge development and effective curriculum implementation. You go to the next slide, please. Prior to joining LE 3 years ago to lead our partnership with DC Public Schools, I was a DCPS literacy coach, central office manager, and AP for 8 years. And so DCPS is very, very close to my heart. And in particular, I'm excited to talk with you about LEAP, because going back to what Catherine has said around systemic improvement, one of the things that we saw is that we believed that LEAP made a significant impact on student growth. And so if you see here, the second sort of grayish bar represents student achievement prior to LEAP, and then that first blue bar represents student achievement after 1 year of implementation, and the dark blue bar after 2 years of implementation. So what this told us is that LEAP, despite being somewhat disruptive when it went at scale, as any district-wide initiative could be, that we were really onto something that was really strengthening teacher instruction and student outcomes that was sustained also over time. And so was not just a momentary bump, but again, going back to that idea of taking root, was continuing to improve over time. Next slide, please. So there were a number of decision points that DCPS needed to make, and in figuring out sort of how they were going to support teachers with their new math curriculum, which was Eureka. And I wanted to share this slide because I think it represents the decision that district leaders need to make, right? We know that high quality materials, and we'll assume that Eureka is a high quality material, makes a significant and positive effect on student outcomes. But if it combined with professional learning, makes an even more positive impact. And I think district leaders then need to wrestle with, where do we devote our resources? Do we say, you know what, we gave them a great curriculum and we're just going to be satisfied with that? Or do we also devote resources to the professional learning to even more significantly help positively impact students? And so this was something that DCPS wrestled with as they were figuring out how to leverage their teacher leaders, and ultimately decided that, knowing that high quality materials are essential but not sufficient, decided to dramatically increase the amount of resources that were going into professional learning. And so therefore our goals, and I think this connects nicely to the toolkit as far as having very clear goals, our goals were not only so that we would see student achievement continue to increase on PARCC, also to close achievement gaps, but also we had a very particular goal for teachers, which was that teachers would learn to expertly and elegantly implement the Eureka curriculum in a way that best met the needs of their students. Next slide, please. So there are lots and lots of decisions that need to be made when you are creating a professional learning system that seeks to align itself to the curriculum that's being used, as well as the assessments that are being used. And a lot of what we're talking about here in this model that DCPS used, teacher leadership, high quality curriculum, cycles of improvement, those pieces in isolation aren't really what's new. What is new, I think, and incredibly hard is the alignment that is required across a district for those things to be working together so that teachers experience coherence and therefore students experience coherence. And it can often feel as if it is rocket science. And so there are a number of things that we need to make decisions about. We talked a little bit about the vision. So why are we doing this? And then we also need to figure out the structure, right? What structure is actually going to support this coherence and is also reasonable? And we know that our schools could pull it off, and it's research-based. The conditions, so what is the district going to do? What are schools going to do? And for how long? You know, one of the things that was really important to DCPS was considering the implementation of the model as also a way of building capacity. And so there were times when, at the very beginning of this initiative, the district leaned in heavily. And then what we've seen over the last couple of years is them, you know, pull back, central office pull back as schools become more and more comfortable with this curriculum-specific professional learning. So, for example, in the first year of this model, DCPS provided the scope and sequence for what would be studied over the course of the year. To provide, knowing that if teacher leaders were coming together to lead the professional learning, we didn't want them spending all their time creating the materials, just like we don't want teachers spending all their time creating the materials. And so provided this adult learning curriculum to teacher leaders to use. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is that DCPS is creating far fewer of those materials because teacher leaders have learned to use the existing ones with more savvy. They are also, because of their experience leading it now for multiple years, able to identify which pieces to replicate and to create on their own. But I think this piece around figuring out how we build capacity and the district's role is a critical consideration. Next slide, please. One of the things that I think made overall DCPS's decisions not easier as far as the sort of the rocket science metaphor goes, but more informed was starting with a pilot. So again, the complexity of this alignment can be really tricky, and we've certainly seen districts that have gone, have launched, you know, complex initiatives at scale in the past and really struggled to sort of, you know, put the marbles back in the bag when it becomes clear that there were just a number of things that we, you know, weren't able to anticipate because we sort of went whole hog. And instead of taking it a step at a time. And so I think at the district level, when we're thinking about how we are leveraging teacher leaders to support, in particular, instructional improvements, having a pilot so that we can deeply study the context will enable districts to really refine, and as Catherine was sharing earlier, the different types of roles, really figure out what are the strategies that we want to use. So for example, in 2013, when the TLI cohort began, which is the Teacher Leadership Initiative in DCPS, it was only with 6 schools, and there really weren't very many constraints. It really was, you know, schools identify a problem of practice, we will fund a teacher leader, and, you know, you all build your model for how you're going to leverage the teacher leader. And by having this, you know, expansive approach with only 6 schools, so it was low risk, just really enabled central office and the principals and the teachers and the teacher leaders to learn so much about what was working and what wasn't, that then by the time we got to 2016, had the bright spots, you know, on which to build. We had a number of school leaders and teacher leaders that were celebrating teacher leadership as a way to support instructional improvement. And so whenever possible, this approach of piloting first feels really critical, particularly at the district level. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Oops. Had some fun animation in there.
I think another piece that connects directly to the state toolkit is, and I love this line of, in order to make an impact, we have to connect the dots with other existing initiatives. And, I think it goes from, level to level of teachers feeling like it's not always clear what the school leader's priorities are and perhaps experiencing some lack of coherence, and the school leader feeling like they experiencing that from the district leadership, and the district's perhaps feeling that from the state. And so I think this really thinking about how we are aligning our teacher leadership focus across all of these different stakeholder groups in a nested approach feels very, very critical to ensure that coherence and alignment. Because teacher leadership will frequently mean that teachers are stepping out of the classroom, or they are adding responsibilities to their plate. And as teachers step into more of a leadership role, we have to start thinking even more about which priorities are going to come off people's plates. Not only the individual teacher leader, so what in this stepping into this leadership role, what is that teacher leader no longer going to do? But similarly, the school leader is now charged with not only continuing to run the school, but also developing the capacity of their teacher leader in leadership. And so then what is that school leader going to stop doing? And similarly, the district leaders are thinking. And so I just think more and more and more, this focus on limited priorities and aligned priorities will be critically important as teacher leadership continues to grow. Go to the next slide, please. That is used in DC public schools, and is called LEAP, Learning Together to Improve Our Practice. And I wanted to share this slide in particular because I think it does a really nice job of just showing what the teacher leader role is. And again, this is district-wide. So every school has, K through 12, has at least one math LEAP leader and at least one ELA LEAP leader. And the high schools also have a social studies LEAP leader and a science LEAP leader. And they are charged with leading these cycles of improvement that are focused on the curriculum. I think one of the things that is really compelling about this model is how it's different from some traditional PLCs, or how some conceptualizations of PLCs of there's not a rotating leader that steps up to share something, but it is truly a content leader that is charged with truly developing their teachers as better planners and deliverers of math instruction or ELA instruction. And I think another thing that's really important to point out here, going back to this idea of the decision points that districts need to make, is thinking about what is the structure that we believe will support our teachers so that we are truly making an impact in teacher behaviors that are most directly linked to student achievement. And again, I think that link is critically important of, I remember when I was a PLC leader, I would bring something that I thought was really interesting and share it with my colleagues. But at the end of the day, I don't think anyone was really checking in on whether or not the things I was bringing to the table were the things that were going to make the most significant impact on our students. And I think what this does so nicely is, particularly when we're looking at week 1 and week 2, is that there is really time devoted. So that's 90 minutes in week 1 and 90 minutes in week 2 that are focused on, a shared learning experience among the, let's say, 3 through 5 math teachers aligned to their curriculum. And then the next week, they have the opportunity to plan and integrate their knowledge into the lesson the next day or the task that they're creating, and then to look at what were the implications of that learning and that planning on students by looking at student work aligned to what they had been learning. And so I think we have so much focus on looking at data and looking at student work. What I really appreciate about this model is how much it focuses really on sort of the forward-looking and really helping and empowering teachers to learn how to use their materials well to be more responsive to students. Yeah, and one other thing to point out too is in between each of these weeks, so it goes back to the role, and I would say this is sort of a combination of peer observer and coach. The content leader or LEAP leader is providing that peer observation and peer coaching in a variety of forms. Can we go to the next slide, please? Something else that the toolkit, I think, does a nice job of connecting to is the importance of enabling conditions and ensuring that the district and the schools have very clear understanding of what the conditions are that will, again, enable this content-specific professional learning led by teacher leaders in-house to take root. And I know we've already talked about limited priorities. One of the other things that we know is really, really critical is that master schedule, and something that is really challenging for districts, and I think a place where we've been able to provide some support is figuring out how do we make the time for our teachers to come together and learn together, and in particular, what are the myriad of options that we can leverage in order to create time for that teacher leader to not only facilitate the learning, provide the coaching follow-up, but also have the time to plan for that. And if it's a hybrid role, still have time to plan for their classroom responsibilities. And so this finagling of master schedules is critically important for something like this to work, and I think is just so directly aligned to having limited priorities. Just like we see our priorities and our values in our budget, we see it in our master schedule as well. And so those two things are inextricably linked. Next slide, please. One of the final points that I wanted to share about how DCPS and leading educators approach our work in professional learning is really around this idea of how we're figuring out if we're making an impact on students. And this is really similar to the list of metrics that are listed on page 26, but we take that second one around behaviors and specify it a little bit more. And so again, going back to this idea of decisions that we need to make, I think it is somewhat easy to fall into the decisions that we are going to measure the progress of a teacher leadership initiative on, satisfaction. So are the teacher leaders happy? Are the principals happy? Are the teachers who are getting the support from the teacher leader happy? And then, moving right over into student learning. And now are we seeing that, with this investment in teacher leadership, that there is a clear connection to student learning? And I think what is problematic about that approach of skipping over so many pieces in the middle is that it really becomes challenging to figure out. So if the teachers are happy but students aren't growing, why is that? And I think it can tend at times to lead to sort of an over-focus on what our students are struggling with and can't do yet. And in fact, there's a myriad of variables, right, before we get from sort of satisfaction to student outcomes that deserve investigation so that we can really figure out what is the root cause of something like a teacher leadership initiative not leading to student outcomes. And so we work hard to use 6 levels when we are selecting the metrics that we are going to use to assess our impact. So in addition to satisfaction, we also look at leader learning. So for example, when we are building the capacity within our teacher leaders to lead these content cycles, we're also assessing if teacher leaders are learning the content along the way using something called our knowledge and skills survey that we adapted from an SAP tool. And we also do that for the teachers. And most recently, we had a fascinating piece of data where we were assessing teacher knowledge on various ELA standards prior and after about 3 months of content-specific learning. And while we saw significant bumps in a number of places, in particular, teachers had learned much better how to choose a complex text and how to select academic vocabulary. There had been very little improvement in knowing how to design and select high-impact text-dependent questions. And knowing how crucial that is to the Common Core standards, I think had we not had that data of teacher practice, teacher knowledge, we could have just, again, gone and looked at student outcomes and thought, oh my gosh, our students are just not using evidence. And instead, we actually are able, before we get to that point, to say, gosh, our teachers are still need to learn more about text-dependent questions, and that's fine, but gosh, at least we know. And it reminds me of our RTI approach, of we can create remarkable interventions for our students, but we also need to know, were our students in seat for that intervention? And so we need to look at a variety of factors to really unearth what are the things that are really contributing to positive student outcomes, and then what are the things that are the barriers, so that we are intervening at the right place. And the last thing I just wanted to share is what that looked like in practice for DCPS. If we could go to that last slide, please. Yep. Sorry, I made a mistake. The one before. Next to last. Here are just some of the ways that DCPS and leading educators collected the both formative evidence and summative evidence around these different levels. So I think it goes back again to limited priorities. So the central office conducted in 1 year 131 school visits to observe LEAP seminars in action, to see what's working, what's not. Tons and tons of conversations with stakeholders around level 1, satisfaction. Also did a lot of work collaborating with the people who supported schools directly. So leading educators, coaches were working side by side about 30 schools. And so we were able to share a lot of insight into the conditions, the school conditions. So are people actually meeting for LEAP? Is the coaching actually happening? Is the coaching strong? And as well, using the insight survey, they were able to also get to add some LEAP-specific questions to that. So there are a myriad of ways that they were assessing whether or not metrics were being met and how to refine those priorities as a result. And with that, I will hand it back over to Catherine.
Great. Thank you so much, Maggie. Really appreciate it. And I have two quick questions, one quick question I want to ask you before we transition over to Megan. Someone asked about the LEAP gains and whether they're true for all students on average, or if you saw some differences based on different student subgroups. You may not know that. That may be a DCPS specific question, but thought I'd ask just in case that's something you know off the top of your head.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So in year 1 of LEAP, and I know the year 1 data better than year 2, but this is a great question because I need to know. I need to know the second one too. In year 1 data, we saw significant growth across every single subgroup. And that was the first time since PARC that DCPS could say that. In every single subgroup, we saw improvement, and that's incredibly compelling. And then what we also saw was, and again, this is why, this goal setting, I think, and vision for like what your teacher leadership initiative is trying to accomplish is so critical, is that what we saw with LEAP in year 1 and in year 2 is that our achievement gaps were getting smaller and sort of decreased at a more significant rate than they had in the past with PARC, but still are just an incredibly long way off of what is acceptable. And so I think we see promise, but certainly have a long way to go in ensuring that, again, students across all subgroups are making progress. I think the last thing that I just wanted to share connected to that question is, the correlation between implementation and student outcomes is also really, really important. And so the last slide that I skipped over, and that because I was talking too much, shows that those schools that had high rates of LEAP fidelity had significantly more growth for their students than those schools with limited implementation. And that's also true in our high poverty schools. And so I think, again, just thinking about, regardless of the student subgroup, we know that this model and approach to leveraging teachers who are content experts, right, to support their colleagues, it's a way of helping all of the boats rise, at the same time. And so that's why it's something that we really, really believe in. I hope that answered your question. Feel free to email me offline if I can provide more context.
Great. Thank you so much. It's really amazing, compelling work. We have one more presenter to share, and I am so excited to have her with us today. I'd like to introduce Megan Archuleta. Is going to talk about the teacher leadership work that's happening in Herfana School District in Colorado. Megan is someone who has been a teacher leader, and now a principal. And so she has really worn all the hats and seen from multiple perspectives. And so we are just so thrilled to have her with us today. And I am going to turn things over to Megan.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to share the journey that I've been a part of in multiple pieces of each puzzle that we're trying to solve and work through. So I am Megan Archuleta, and I'm currently the principal, of course, of my school in one of the 3 schools in our district. And I have actually taught out of 2 of the 3 districts and was a teacher leader in both of those in different roles and responsibilities within that those positions. So in the beginning, 7 years ago, my current school went into their first year of turnaround. It was the first year that we were being, graded by state assessments, and it was definitely a new playing field for administrators and teachers. Teacher turnover was not even a conversation. Our teachers were veteran teachers. Our average was like 20 years. They had been in our district for so many years, and they were great, and they were rated as effective, and there was not a lot of turbulence in our school. Well, of course, when our turnaround efforts schools, it was a complete turnover for all of us. The retention rates dropped below 50%. And that is very scary in a rural school district, because retaining teachers is one thing, attracting teachers is even a bigger thing. The sad thing about that situation is 50% wouldn't even be the bottom low of one of our schools. One of our schools went into actually a 33% turnover in one of these years. And trying to replace that many teachers in one school, never mind the elementary school is really low, and then we actually even had the high school hit some really high turnover rates. So we're trying to fill in these positions, and 2 of our schools are in turnaround, and we're still trying to do these things. And kind of the scary thing is, once we would, attract a teacher or 2 and fill in these positions, we would have at least 5 in our district that would leave before December, and an easy 3 to 4 leaving before October, which is not new information. As brand new teachers on alternative licensure in those situations, there are higher rates that they do leave at these particular times, and our district was facing that situation year after year after year. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Well, of course, anytime there's high turnover in staff, it's not going to take long for there to be some monumental shifts in leadership and leadership styles. And this was the turning point for our district. And we had superintendents and principals that really decided that teacher attraction and retention was at the heart of our turnaround efforts. They realized that something had to change, and if we were going to close achievement gaps within our schools and for our students, we really needed to retain the best teachers that we had. We needed to invest in the teachers that we currently had, and to see what strengths they brought to the table and brought to the teacher culture in our school, and how we could best manage that and spread that across the district to really support those retention efforts. The principals began building the leadership capacity within the buildings. And it was a lot of the veteran teachers, and we're bringing them to the table, like, what has made you stay? What makes you want to stay? How do you continue to just excel in your efforts of teaching and closing these achievement gaps when it seems to be a challenge for other teachers in this profession and in our district? And of course, we all were given small leadership roles, definitely depending on what strengths that we had and what we wanted to do. In the beginning, all of us would keep our priorities of teaching first, and then we would get small stipends. Sometimes we didn't even get stipends to do some of these extra duties that would really help with that teacher culture piece. As the first year went, we realized it was making a difference. It was a small difference, but we could see the importance of what we were doing. So then our district invested in some professional development for the principals and the teachers. So how are the principals going to be able to build this capacity, and how are the teachers going to effectively lead these teachers in the roles and responsibilities that we would have? And as we started doing this, we started attracting teachers who really liked the idea of some extra responsibilities, teacher leadership, without having to go to grad school for it, or having to get an administrative license, or be put on that path that some teachers are not comfortable with. And not all of us are made to be principals. Not all of us are interested in that path. And so how do we continue to support this, but know that they are not going to be pressured into more responsibilities without the teacher wanting them themselves? The first year, these efforts had increased the retention by 15%. And when you're at 33% and you are approaching that 50% mark again, 15% was a celebration, because at this mark, that was the first time that we've increased our retention rather than continue to see that decrease in retention of our schools. Next slide, thank you. To help with this effort, the administration team and of course our community, they really helped us pass this mill levy bond. And really the main goal was attracting and retaining quality teachers, but also investing in the quality teachers that we already had, and continue the work of building this teacher leadership capacity within all 3 of our schools in different realms. The budget reflected the funds for teacher leadership roles. So, and you've seen the multiple different types of roles that teachers could have, and we have a various combination of them within our district. Some continue to have that full schedule of teaching responsibilities, and then they pick up here and there or are given an extra plan time. Some teachers are given a half day of responsibilities and the other half day leadership roles within that. And we even hired full teacher leadership positions, and that is actually where I'm coming out of, as I was an instructional coach. The mentors that we have that really, our induction mentor program is really just a differentiated program built for the support of all teachers. And so various teachers are in those programs, whether it's for professional, to do the transition from an initial to a professional license, or if they just really need some extra support in some instruction, and it just kind of depends, or assessment. So we have our mentors who are a piece of our leadership team with our teachers, and they really dive in with what we have specifically assigned to them. So some of our mentors are assessment experts, some of them are content experts, some of them are instruction experts, and some of them are even like the intervention piece. And so we continue to build our mentors into this as well. We have team leaders. So the design of our school, we're preschool through 8th grade in my school and the other elementary school, and then we have a high school. So we really have content experts as well as team leaders. The high school has 2 content experts, and they share the responsibility of teaching as well as given time and a stipend to help build the teachers around them and to gain that knowledge in the content they're teaching and how to deliver the curriculum. And our team leaders, because we have phase 1 and phase 2 because of all of our grades, we have team leaders that lead those PLCs and really look at that data and what is going on with progress monitoring. Is it looking like we're making a positive shift? Do we need to refine some schedules? Do we need to change the way that we're developing our interventions? And so we have several just levels of these teacher leadership roles within our building, and they're never assigned without a discussion. And we always really promote, what are your strengths? What can you give, and how do you want to give those? Of course, this is a huge learning curve for teachers, administrators, and the community. Teachers, for the first time in a long time, they're given that real buy-in. And if you've ever worked in a turnaround school, it feels that you lose that piece because you have all of these agencies trying to help you, and really you're on this clock, and the sense of urgency that's being given, it feels like you've lost a piece of your leadership and you've lost that buy-in. And so you have that piece where teachers are given that voice again, and they're allowed to give that expertise that they've developed and gained over the years of experience. Administrators building that relationship with a teacher leader, sometimes letting go of some of that control and allowing and trusting that your teacher leaders are your partner, not against you, and building that strong partnership. And that was a big step for some of our administrators. And some administrators that we have, they were just great. They knew that this was so important that it was not at all difficult for them to kind of let go, build that buy-in with those teacher leaders, and understand that that relationship was going to make their school stronger. And then the community, which we live in a small community, and we have what I like to call community experts in education. And so they couldn't understand how some of our strongest teachers had been pulled out of the classroom and put into these full-time leadership roles. And that was a lot of time spent educating our community, educating our parents, to let them know that this was really adding to that main vision we had of our school and improving the efforts that we were doing within our building. And of course, we're years down the road, and our community completely understands and supports what we're doing, and our parent leadership team is just an awesome ally to work with us in a new idea of how to reconstruct a school that has come out of turnaround and that we're continuing to improve in our efforts. By the end of the second year, our retention rates were at 87.5%. Now this is exciting because that means in the school that was at that 33%, we're at 50% gains of retention. And that was just such a celebration for our district. So the exciting news and currently the things that we are celebrating, but also keeping our focus and the vision of what we are trying to do in our community. All three of our schools are out of turnaround or priority improvement. So I did not say this previously, but eventually with those high turnover rates, of course, our school our district just went down completely. Even our district was in priority improvement. And of course, we would expect that. But for the first time in 7 years, all three of our schools and our district are not in turnaround or priority status. And this is very exciting for all of us that have really dedicated our time and our efforts to this work. Both elementary schools are fully staffed. This is huge because in my particular school, we have 2 teachers per grade level. And there were several times where we had 1 teacher and a paraprofessional in a classroom full of students. Our classrooms are not designed to have more than about 27 kids, and we had far more in there. So this is just so exciting after 6 years that we were able to work together as a team between our efforts of our leadership, our mentoring induction program, and the work of the community in the district, that we are a fully staffed school. And this includes our small mountain town elementary school, which is even more in a remote location than we are. Collaboration between the teacher and teachers leaders are at the root of our schools. If you could just see the collaboration that goes on in this building and the levels of support that these teachers receive, especially the new ones into our district, it is just phenomenal. And it's just work that you cannot imagine the impact until you are watching it from a standpoint. And as an administrator, as I'm relearning my role and my position in this situation, I enjoy just standing back and listening to these meetings and watching these teacher leaders just develop these teachers and then watching that work go right back into the classroom. So it has a direct effect on our students. Of course, the administration and the team leaders, we are a fine team. I have to say that to get that many strong leaders in the building with so many perspectives, we still know that the purpose of why we have done this is at the heart of what we need to do and how we need to finish this vision as we work through that every single day. So that just that relationship that's built and that trust between administrators and teachers leaders, it's the first time again in 7 years that we've had that amount of trust that goes on in those meetings. And the good news is all 3 schools have the same staff that they started with the school year with. So we did not have anybody leave in October and we did not have anybody leave in December. And these are just, again, these celebrations that you do not understand until you are in the middle. And as somebody that was a teacher leader for years, I remember thinking, how in the world are we going to deliver science instruction without a science teacher? There's no way we can share staff as they're booked in their short staff next door. And again, when those priorities are not how you're going to get a teacher in the classroom versus how are you going to better the teacher in the classroom, just that is a monumental shift for us. Both elementary school principals feel that the majority of their staff will return. Our surveys will go out next week, so we're really excited to see what that looks like. I did not mention our high school because our high school is we have a teacher that may be looking at retirement. So again, we don't have a teacher leaving because they're dissatisfied with what's going on in our school, but rather that he has come to the end of his career, which is going to be difficult because it is a high stake position, which is math. And recruiting a math teacher and retaining a math teacher is not easy. And in my school alone, we did 3 years without one, and we have completed our second year with the full junior high staff, which includes a certified math teacher. So again, it's just these wonderful things happening within our district. And that's the end of mine. I speak very quickly, but I also have given you guys about 5 minutes to ask any questions. I do not have my email, but Catherine, you're more than welcome to give out my email to anybody that needs it or has any questions. And thank you for your time. And I'm very grateful to be a part of this movement that is happening across our country and our schools. It's very exciting.
Thanks so much, Megan. This Amazing work. I know I have heard this before, but it is just so inspiring. Really exciting to hear all the successes you've had. We did have one question that came in through the chat box, which is around how you prepared teacher leaders. You know, did they have professional development? How did you figure out who was fit and get them prepared for?
So getting them prepared was not easy. And again, we all started off with small roles, very, very small roles, roles that you don't think could make an impression. And that was really how we looked at our veteran staff, because that was who was still here. And we needed to figure out why they were staying when everybody else was leaving. And we really invested in that. And just each person, our administrators kind of pulled apart, like, what our evaluations look like, what were our strengths that they could observe. And we just came together to the table and said, you know, Megan, you're really good at this data analysis. That's really your strength and your classroom management skills. And we all kind of went around and worked on what we really could deliver to a new teacher within our building. And that was just the beginning. We just stepped in and took on these positions without a whole lot of preparation. But what this did, it was allowed our administrators to see who was willing to take this teacher leadership role serious, and how could they apply it, who was dedicating that extra time to this, and who was prepared for it, but who wanted to do it. Because of course you're going to have staff members who want to be in this position, but that might not be their strength. Not all teachers are adult teachers as well. And so that's how our administrative staff started selecting, pulling that information. And then that following year is when we went to professional development. We wrote a couple of grants to get some coaching, which was wonderful. That was a week-long training that we all participated with our administrators, because that particular coaching session also talked about how to bridge that gap between a coach and an administrator, and how to build the relationships around that. And then we just continue to look for professional development that we feel our teacher leaders need and that they need that support in. So it's just been a slow working in progress over the 5 years. But again, the beginning of it was just who's natural at this and who's going to dedicate some extra time and who really can find success in what they're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have well, we are pretty much at our time, but I have just a couple of questions that I want to address quickly. We have some general questions. One of them is about identifying teacher leaders, which I think goes right up with what you were sharing, Megan, is thinking about that there are some people who might volunteer for things, but they're not exactly the right fit. Others who are maybe in hiding, who have a lot of skills, but they're not raising their hand for that position. I'll turn on my webcam since I'm talking too. It's a good reminder. Okay. So one thing that you can do in that sense is think about who your pools of teachers are that aren't volunteering but may be interested in a low responsibility role. Maybe they're not ready to step up to a 50% relief time role or something that has a lot of responsibilities, but maybe there's another sort of starter teacher leadership role for them. So a lot of times we think about national board certified teachers. They get their certification, they have voluntarily measured themselves against rigorous standards, they've sort of proven their efficacy, but a lot of them don't have formal teacher leadership roles. So that can be a great place to think about who might have some of those skills, especially because the national board process to explain your instructional decisions, talk about why did I make these decisions get to this effective place. Megan, I also really liked what you shared about this fostering what people are good at. I think it's a really important role for the principal, right? That a principal plays a big role in thinking about not just supporting teacher leaders, but also looking to teachers and saying, who might be ready for this in the next couple of years, or who can I foster to help them build up and know that this is an opportunity for them. Right. Let's see. One more question. Looking at. Great. Oh, so this one is on professional learning again. So thinking about professional learning, whether it is formal or informal? So that's a really great question. It's tough to sometimes think about finding funds or time or logistics to bring a lot of teacher leaders together to engage in in-person professional learning. I will just say quickly that we heard in Allie's story, and Megan, I think we heard in your story too, actually, Maggie, in your story as well, that you all have been in lots of different kinds of roles. You've taken on lots of different leadership opportunities over time. There are great partner organizations out there that even if you can't bring all teachers together all at once for professional learning, there are lots of ways for teachers to advance their leadership skills by engaging in some of these other opportunities. And so it's great to look at the roles that exist, the kinds of skills that are really important to be successful in those roles, and what opportunities already are out there that teachers might be willing to engage in to help hone those skills over time.
Mm-hmm.
So that is it from me, making sure that we don't have any unanswered questions. I think that is it. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. If you would like to share this webinar with a colleague, we did record today, so we will be posting this recording online. You're welcome to share it. Also, check out the toolkit. Oh, I need to go to the last slide to say if you have any questions about how to use the toolkit, about what is going on around teacher leadership. If you have any questions for the presenters that hit you after today's webinar, feel free to email me. I'll connect you with anyone we need to connect with. And once again, thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care, everyone.